So I would only add to the last seminar, you know, you've heard me say less is more very frequently. And what I've tried to do is to use the minimum effective dose to achieve the maximum result. Now what I mean by that is you have extremes. One extreme you have the Wim Hof method. 30 to 40 power breaths like crazy, followed by a breath hold. At the other end of the spectrum, some people advocate just breathe in, breathe out and hold. Okay. Now, the benefits and drawbacks of both, in the Wim Hof method, you may get a 3-minute breath hold, but your oxygen saturation may go down to 50 or 60%, which if you're doing this on a regular basis, I feel is too low. On the other hand, one breath in, one breath out, will get you into hypoxemia. It will take you below 91%, and so you will still get splenic contraction, you will still get the bore effect. EPO needs quite low levels of oxygen saturation. But to me, one breath in, one breath out will last less than a minute, your breath hold. And to me, I don't feel that is enough for me to get that meditation effect, that you're going to have all of these voices in your head saying breathe, creating tension, and you need some time to overcome, to relax. So you have extremes, as in all things. And so I chose somewhere in between. So my practice is just 5 forced exhales and then a breath hold. And this gives me around a 2-minute plus breath hold. And I've never gone below 80% oxygen saturation. And that is acceptable to me to do on a daily basis. So that will give me kidney EPO. It will give me splenic contraction with an 80% hematocrit. It will give me the bore effect, because if you're holding for 2 minutes, your CO2 is rocketing, and that is the driver to breathe, not oxygen. So when your CO2 is rising and your oxygen saturation is falling, then the oxygen leaves the blood, it loses its binding to hemoglobin, and it is then delivered to the tissues in your brain, your muscles. So I feel, so that's what I mean, the minimum effective dose to achieve the maximum result. I don't feel the Wim Hof method gives me everything I want, because the saturation is too low. One breath in, one breath out doesn't give me everything I want, because the breath hold isn't long enough, and I want meditation. I want to feel I'm sitting there and I'm fighting a battle in my mind. So, moving on to today, in the first seminar we did mention the phrase freeze, fight, flight, probably several times, and it's important to understand that our behaviour is a response to our physiology and blood chemistry. So out of those 3 states, if you want to change state, you have to change your blood chemistry. And how resilient we are depends how efficiently we can change from one state to the next without being locked in any one particular state. Okay. Now that will become more apparent as we explain each of the 3 brain states, and it might be a good idea to do different colours if you can. So the first one I mentioned, was freeze. And this is part of the reptilian brain, which we still have remnants of, believe it or not, going back several hundred million years. And the nerve fibers run from the brain stem down either side of the spine. Okay, so the first one, the reptilian brain, we still have in our brain stem. And if you've had any dealings with lizards, as I have, you will know that when a lizard is threatened, it will play dead on the basis that the threat will pass by. And spiders do pretty much the same thing. They have reptilian brain too. If you want to catch a spider in your home, it's starting to come in now, it's getting colder, if you stamp the floor beside them, they will freeze because they will sense the vibration as a threat and they will freeze. So you put a glass over them and you take them outside. Easy. If you touch them, they'll run. Okay? But they have that freeze response. Human beings still have the remnants of that reptilian brain, and we can be paralyzed with fear. You've all heard the phrase, frozen to the spot, frozen in fear. And that is the reptilian brain taking over. So, just recently an episode happened which displays the freeze reptilian brain response. So, if you want to gather round a little bit and...
Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Dad, where is it? Stop! Dad, where is it now? Dad, where is it? Dad, where is it? Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God! Dad, I have to get it now. Dad, get it out! Dad, get it out now! Dad, where are you going to put it? Open the blooming window first.
It's too big to get out the window.
Dad, well let me get past first. No, Dad, stop it, Dad. I'm not getting it, Dad. Stop. Got it. I've got it. Look at it. I'm going to slide. Oh my God, Dad, what is that?
Right,
What, Dad, no, don't hit the glass up. It's going to back.
Get the drawer.
Dad, put it back on the floor. Dad, I don't know how to open the door. Bloody hell, Dad. Oh my God, get the hell out. Oh, Dad, that's so bad. Get away from me. Oh my God. That's actually vile. Get it out now. Oh my God, it's massive.
Okay. The reptilian brain in action. Both in terms of the spider, who did freeze, and I just put a glass over it. Obviously, I was being mischievous a little bit and adding fuel to her panic. That is obvious. But it just illustrates the point of how human beings can immediately go into reptilian brain, can't do anything about it. She couldn't bring herself back into parasympathetic. Not for several minutes or hours later. And that's the debilitating effect the reptilian brain can have, so that. So, now what we need to understand now is what is the physiology of that episode. So the physiology of the freeze response would be a person would become very withdrawn, so there would be withdrawal, obvious anxiety. If it becomes chronic and you get locked into reptilian brain, there would be depression and a feeling of being unable to get out, unable to change state. Okay, can see very easily how that could happen. Yeah. So it happens because you need to look at the blood chemistry. An individual would have CO2 at low levels. They would have oxygen in the tissues in the brain at low levels. They would have inflammatory markers significantly increased. Okay? So that is the blood chemistry of somebody in freeze mode, reptilian brain. You can understand why the CO2 is low. Right? You heard Callista's breathing. She's breathing out a ton of CO2. Right? So her CO2 is very low. That means the Bohr effect cannot take place. How is her oxygen low then? If she's doing all this breathing really hard, panic breathing. She's taking very shallow breaths high in the chest, but the answer comes back to Mr. Bohr once again. So if you remember our Bohr curve, it's a nice S shape. And on the one side we had SpO2 and the other we had PaO2. So on this side you have levels of oxygen saturation, how much oxygen is actually in the blood. And the PaO2 is the partial pressure of oxygen, which is how easy or difficult it is for the oxygen to leave the blood. Now, what happens with overbreathing as CO2 falls, there is a left shift in the oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve. So at any given level, so the normal curve would be there, say there, partial pressure. With a left shift in the Bohr curve, you draw the line down, and there is a significant reduction in the partial pressure of oxygen. Yeah, can you see that left shift, the dotted line? So when the partial pressure of oxygen is lowered, oxygen binds to hemoglobin. It is not available to be delivered to the tissues and the brain and the muscles. So a person in reptilian brain state would have low oxygen and low CO2. The worst, like perfect storm. And because of that, the inflammatory markers will shoot up. Okay, does that make sense? Does that make sense, Rachel, to you? Other things will happen too, because if you are withdrawn, you wouldn't be very sociable, you'd be inactive, you will likely have low levels of BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, because to increase your BDNF, you need to do high-intensity exercise. A person who's depressed is not going to do high-intensity exercise. And at the same time, their levels of dopamine will lower, their levels of serotonin will lower. So you can see, I mean, the example in the video was an intermittent reptilian brain state, which is fine, because you can get out of it. Some people can't. They chronically are in a low CO2, low oxygen, and a lot of the research into cognitive decline, and particularly Parkinson's, has shown low levels of BDNF, low levels of oxygen in the brain. This is doing both. So essentially they are trapped into reptilian brain freeze.
Could it have anything to do with being irrational as well? Because it's irrational,
yeah.
the frightened,
Yeah, anxiety.
Is that the irrationality?
Yeah. So that is our third. I'll do them maybe different colours. So, from freeze, I mentioned fight. So let's have a look at the fight brain state. And this is several 100 million years after the reptilian brain, and it's known as the primate brain. And here, the vagus nerve will travel into the heart and lungs. Because if you if you are in sympathetic mode, fight or flight, it affects your breathing. Your respiratory rate will increase, your heart rate will increase, your blood pressure will increase, you're ready to fight. Okay, so we know this primate brain as the sympathetic nervous system. Let's have a look at the physiology. You would have an injection of epinephrine, norepinephrine, cortisol, otherwise known as adrenaline.
You get a massive dump on that.
Yeah. As soon as someone charges in now with a knife, it will hit within 100th of a second. You will be ready to fight or to run. So the physiology is that you will have all of these stress hormones hitting your bloodstream. So an individual would show signs of aggression. They would be very aggressive. They would be antisocial if you were locked into sympathetic mode. What you might call triggered or have a short fuse. And because if it becomes chronic, and I think we all know people who are in reptilian brain state and who are always anxious and life is treating them really bad and they're depressed. And we know people in primate brain state who you can see are so triggered, anything is going to set them off. So
I just seem to like that all the time. You never just go back to normal.
Yeah,
So
absolutely, yeah. So this type of person, can be locked into it. And of course then, having all of these stress hormones careering around your bloodstream gives poor health outcomes, obviously.
Well, people who, for example, martial artists and boxers have to have that control to be able to channel it, lead it, and then...
Now that is the civilized brain, so that's the next one. So, but do you see my point, that our resilience depends upon our ability to change state efficiently and not be locked into any one state. As you said, the boxer would have what we would call controlled aggression, the martial artist. In Hoshin Soul, the primate brain is fight or flight. And so it will increase your survivability. So as an intermittent brain state, it's what you need to survive or to run away.
Because you need to be able to make a determination in a very short space of time whether you read the situation and you can decide which of those two.
Well, all three.
Maybe it's not the first one, but the second and third one, you've got to be able to say, I can cope with this or I can't.
Yeah, absolutely. So the third brain state is, if you think of the primate brain as fight or flight, you would think of the parasympathetic or civilized brain as a flight to safety. Because the important thing with the parasympathetic is feeling safe and calm and control. Okay? So this is what we know as the parasympathetic.
It can also be calm and controlled on the flight or fight kind if you need to be. Calm.
Well, you're mixing the two then, yeah. Which is what I'm saying. You have to be resilient, not be stuck in any one. Yeah. So, and then start to think of the physiology of the civilized brain. Your CO2 is high because your breathing is controlled. Your oxygen in the tissues is high because of the Bohr effect. Your inflammatory markers are low because when you're breathing slow and you activate the vagus nerve, you release acetylcholine.
So on the flight or fight, the oxygen be high and the CO2.
What will happen is that it will take blood away from your extremities to your core, to your heart, to your lungs, to your brain. So there is a lot going on. So we don't particularly need to worry about high CO2, high O2, simply because it's an emergency, stressful situation that will hopefully last seconds, not any long-term effect. The damaging effect of these two is because of the chronic state, not intermittent. So we can go intermittently into any of these three states, and that's fine, and we can mix them up and be resilient to do that. But as soon as you're stuck in any one, then there are poor health outcomes.
Well,
Obvious with this.
Sorry to interrupt you, just trying to. So what's the positives of the reptilian brain then? What's the positives?
There are soldiers who've been on a battleground. Think of Last Samurai, and if you're surrounded by dead bodies and everyone's shooting and you lie down as well and play dead, isn't that your best chance of survival? Just thinking that might be a possible way for reptilian brain to be useful.
It is extreme danger, isn't it? If you see a tiger in the forest and you freeze, do not move a muscle.
Yeah.
That tiger might not see you, and you don't want to think, oh, I've seen a tiger, I best stay still. You want the body to actually have reacted before you. And in fact, you might freeze thinking you've seen a tiger, and actually it's a shadow.
And there is certain experts that do say, don't
Yes.
they, certain animals.
I think it's a bear as well.
Bear.
It's three beds.
Yeah, don't rely on the tree.
Black bear
Yes.
is aggressive. Brown bear
You
attacks
drink the water and you see
aggressive.
the shark
White
as
bear
well. It's
Yeah.
like just say their eyesight so poor if you freeze. You won't see.
But the whole point is that your body's frozen before your brain's actually even comprehending what
Yeah.
the situation is.
Yes.
And that's
Yeah.
why it's transient.
The reptilian brain is it's instant, isn't it? Before, as you say, before you think.
But you don't have access to your prefrontal cortex whilst you're in fight or flight and reptilian brain. So you literally cannot think rationally.
Yeah.
Which is why you only want to be in it very, very short periods of time. Which is why when you fight or flight, the best thing that you can do is pause.
Yeah.
If you're not in danger. Because
Yeah.
then your brain will catch up and you can actually then decide what the best thing is to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, that's really, well, just to finish off there, so the parasympathetic civilized brain, you're going to have, as well as high CO2, high O2, low inflammation in the body, you're going to have higher amounts of dopamine, you're going to have higher amounts of serotonin, and if you exercise as well, you're going to have higher amounts of BDNF. So obviously this has good health outcomes. But of course, once again, we say we've witnessed people in these two modes, but we've witnessed people locked in parasympathetic, like couch potatoes, who are apathetic, who are fragile. If there is a change of circumstances, there's a fire in the building, I mean, so you don't want to be locked in parasympathetic either. And so I go back to my original statement that our resilience depends upon our ability to change states efficiently, seamlessly, and as quickly as we can in certain circumstances. Now, because we're discussing Hoshin Soul, think of a Hoshin Soul example. If you're in a parasympathetic state and feeling calm, feeling happy, and you are approached aggressively, immediately you're going to have an injection of adrenaline. Now what you do with that is the next step. You could go into reptilian brain and you could freeze, which is not great for survivability. You could stay in parasympathetic and use dialogue to diffuse the situation, because you're in civilized brain. Or you could switch and use that adrenaline into primate brain, into fight or flight. And once the altercation is over, you need to get out of sympathetic mode and not dwell and relive the nightmare over and over in your mind. And some people, you know, hold on to trauma for years, sometimes for the rest of their lives. And so in some cases they do take up self-defense as a coping mechanism. But if they don't address the mind, if they don't clear this nagging doubt, then they'll be thinking, if it happens again, could I do anything? Even with all these multitude of techniques, if they don't address the mind, then they could go back into reptilian mode. Mind training is so important, and that brings us back to the Munpao and the Rinpao. So Huang Qi stressed the mind is the primary actor and the body is secondary. You have to train your mind and then your body, and then both will go together. So you can essentially, what I'm saying is, if you want to get out of freeze reptilian brain, if you're anxious or depressed, you can talk all you want. If you don't change your blood chemistry, you're stuck. You have to change. And that is, of course, what the medical profession do. They give you serotonin, dopamine to elevate your mood. Same with Parkinson's. They have dopamine agonists because their dopamine receptors have been destroyed. So you need to change your blood chemistry. And he was saying about the martial artist who can channel aggression and be a thinking person at the same time. That takes a lot of practice, because you're almost half parasympathetic, half sympathetic at the same time.
Because the whole reason we train and repeat when you're doing motion, so where they say it just becomes second nature and you don't think about it.
Yeah.
Which
Instinctive,
yeah.
flow state. This is what being in command of these three brains will do for you.
And then having the ability to switch back straight away.
Yeah, don't dwell, don't be stuck in sympathetic or reptilian.